Hello and welcome to the AIDEM Interactions, part 2 of the interaction with Paranjoy Guha Thakurta, pioneering economic affairs journalist of India. As all of you heard in the first part, we have covered the issues related to the rise and fall of the Adani empire, especially in the context of the Hindenburg report. But then, as I was telling you, Paranjoy is not a journalist who we can just look at in terms of corporate affairs reporting or analysis of the interactions between the corporate world and the government and of course the larger stock market. He is somebody who has looked at the macroeconomic issues of this country in great detail, and that too for a period of nearly 4.5 decades. So Paranjoy, as I was telling you, we cannot just let you go by. You'll have to look at the larger economic issues and the macroeconomic issues. So let me start with. So one important thing that which we have seen, this whole comparison between GDP and the per capita income, and of course as we have noticed in this election, in this budget, it's very clear that many of these schemes, the schemes which were welfare schemes like the Manrega, all these things have got huge cuts. So what do you make out of this thrust?
The budget presented by Finance Minister Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman is by and large in keeping with the policies that have been followed by the Narendra Modi government since it came to power. It has got an avowedly right-wing approach to the economy. It has great faith in the virtues of the marketplace. The government is a firm believer that in privatization, that the public sector cannot do what the private sector is doing. And that has been the broad economic strategy or the direction of this government. So the budget that was presented on the 1st of February is more or less in keeping
with this approach.
So, at one level, she talked about prosperous India and an inclusive India. She talks about the fruits of development reaching all regions, all citizens, the youth, women, farmers, those belonging to the other backward classes, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes. But it can be argued that the policies of the government, including the programs and policies announced by the finance minister on the 1st of February, will not achieve this goal. And in fact might work to the detriment of the weaker sections on India's India's population. So that would be a summary of the way I see it, that several welfare schemes have not been given the prominence that in my opinion they deserve. And most importantly, I think there are 3 burning issues that concern this country. Unemployment of the youth in particular. 2, inflation, including and especially food inflation. And thirdly, economic inequality. So whereas the finance minister has referred to some of these issues, the little in the budget speech and the government's policies and the subsequent opinions to indicate that the government is serious about tackling what, not me alone, but several of us believe are the burning economic issues.
Like for example, there's been the government and various agencies associated with the government have admitted in passing that that inflation has sustained for a pretty long period in the last few months, last few months. And also, there is also this perception, even from people supporting neoliberal economic policies, that the GDP figures of the government is hugely it is fudged.
Okay.
Yeah. So, how do you look at these?
Okay, these are very different. I mean, it's not easy to summarize these issues in the limited time in a conversation like this one. What is clear to me that India was like other countries in the world, battered by the pandemic. I think the lockdown that was imposed on the 24th of March 2020 was unduly harsh. I think it resulted in some consequences which we still haven't been able to recover from. What we saw in the months of April, May and June, and the government acknowledges it, was reverse migration from cities to villages. It never happened in the history of India.
Yeah.
You could argue that this was the biggest internal migration of its kind, not only in India, perhaps anywhere in the world. That was one thing. Also, what we saw was that India's GDP, the gross domestic product, but using the government's own data, actually shrank for 6 months.
Right.
And other than the agriculture sector, every sector was very badly affected. Now, you talked about inflation. If you look at 21 and 22, I cannot think when there has been double-digit inflation consequently each month for 15 months. Now, at one stage it was above 15%. I'm talking about the wholesale price index, and I'm just looking at the government's own data. So, I don't think it's ever happened like this. That, you've had a high inflation and then it falls. But you never had persistent inflation. It could be for various reasons, including the spike in the oil prices, the crude oil prices after the Ukraine war.
That's the last 1 year.
Yes, that's right. And the refusal of the government to pass on, when the prices came down, to pass on the benefits to the consumer. Again, we can discuss that in detail. But the point on inflation, there are 2 points that need to be noted. It's way, way above what the Reserve Bank of India, our central bank and Apex Monetary Authority believes is a desirable level of inflation. We're nowhere near that 4%. Secondly, after a period of high inflation, over the last 8 months or so, there's been an easing of inflation. But that means nothing, because all that means is that the sheer rate or the pace at which prices have been going up has slowed down. It doesn't mean prices have come down. The second point I think I wish to note, and this is what the government acknowledges, much of the inflation concerns articles of mass consumption. And it's not just petroleum products, but include food articles. Now, when you have food inflation, it affects the poor much more than the rich. So this results in a sharpening of economic inequalities between the rich and the poor. And it also means that you have to depend more and more on subsidized products, notably food, fertilizers for farmers and petroleum products. And it's most unfortunate, I'm bringing it back to the budget. This budget has proposed fairly sharp cuts on the government's subsidies on food and fertilizer. And if you want specific figures, I can give it to you.
Right. I think so. So what does it mean for the economy? I think I'll just add just 2 more questions, but then what does it mean for the overall economy?
It's bad news for young people, It's not just you want to say Agniveer is good and you can get a job for a few years. No, I think our country is very young. I understand we have overtaken China, or we are on the verge of overtaking the population of China with 140 crore or 1.4 billion plus. The difference between China and India is as follows. The median age of India, some people say it's 28, some people say it's 27, some people say it's a little higher, a little later. It means half your population is below that age, roughly. In China, the median age is 37 or 38. So, unemployment, when it concerns the youth, is a very, 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 very serious problem. And this, in my opinion, is one of the reasons why we've seen the kind of unrest that we have in this country in the recent past. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is food inflation hits the poor. That's simply why.
Yeah.
Because the poor spend a larger proportion of their income on food. So they are far more badly affected by inflation. And that is another reason why the gap between the poor has widened and continued to widen. Yes.
Yeah. See, the agriculture sector was one sector which had come into large focus, I mean, both politically as well as economically, especially in the context of the controversial farm laws. And of course, the farmers have been given an assurance and then they've been taken for a ride. But we also see that in the current budget also, the trend of kind of overlooking or the oversight of the agrarian issues and core agrarian factors remains. What do you make out of this at the level of...
You know, I think when Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced that these 3 controversial farm laws were to be withdrawn and abrogated, that was the day of the revered Guru of the Sikhs, Guru Nanak Ji's birthday. And he used 2 words which, to the best of my knowledge, he hasn't used before. One was the word called Kshama, which loosely translated would mean forgiveness. The other was Tapasya, which is like kind of penance, if you like. Yeah. But Mr. Modi, of course, said that he's asking for forgiveness because he could not convince the farmers why they would benefit from these farm laws. And Mr. Modi therefore said his penance, or the time he spent, unfortunately, did not work. So this was, I think, new. Never before had you seen in the history of this country so many farmers agitating, built several makeshift townships on the outskirts of the capital. This was the peak of Corona, hundreds of people died, and finally those laws were withdrawn. I would have expected that even if the government didn't agree on giving the minimum support price, which is one of the major demands of the farmers, would do more than it did for the agriculture sector, for the farmers of this country. Unfortunately, the
allocations are not...
One saw no evidence actually of. I mean, only several schemes were announced that these are all for farmers, these are all, we're going to promote organic farming, etc., etc. There's several schemes, but they are not, I would say, any major schemes. I would say there was no major program aimed at improving or helping the farm sector. And so that is the other thing. On the contrary, several rural development programs have been cut down. I mean, for instance, the Manrega, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, the program under that act. The budget estimate for the program is 60,000 crore, and the government is saying the revised estimate for the current financial year, which ends on the 31st of March 2023, was 89,400. So I'm unable to understand the same Mr. Narendra Modi who on the floor of Parliament described Manrega as epitomizing, as an example of the failure of the past Congress governments, but after the pandemic has had to depend on this program to not just provide some relief to the program. And those who have studied the Manrega, the implementation of the Manrega program in detail will tell you that, money is not paid on time, and there's a lot that is wrong in implementing this program. And by cutting the outlays, you're not really helping at all.
But in spite of the problems in terms of implementation, I think it was a program which brought some kind of economic sustenance to a large segment of the population.
Undoubtedly. In fact, the government should expand it instead of, in my opinion, not doing enough. They should not just provide more money, but they should also ensure that it's better implemented, that the delays in payments, that there needs to be a lot that needs to be done to streamline the entire process. And the central government or the government of India should work far more closely with the state governments to ensure better implementation of the Manrega scheme. Yes.
Yeah. Last question. You talked about Vibrant Gujarat and how it was being, perhaps it was being used to promote the interests of the corporate, certain corporate entities. Now we are seeing a whole series of investor summits, global, so-called global investor summits. I mean, even yesterday and today we have had something in Uttar Pradesh, in Lucknow. And of course this series is...
There was one gentleman missing from the audience.
Yeah.
In Uttar Pradesh, in Lucknow.
the man who should have been there otherwise, Gautam Adani himself, he was missing. But the point is, where is this seems to be an extension of the Vibrant Gujarat program that we saw in...
all I can say, I mean, what you have said is your opinion and you can surely justify it. But if you look at the numbers, the Vibrant Gujarat Summit, if I remember correctly, the first such summit started in 2002, but I might be wrong. But there have been several summits.
2002, yeah.
After each summit, the government sort of puts out these huge numbers that we have signed memoranda of understanding, MOUs worth, literally lakhs of crores and hundreds of lakhs of... I mean, these numbers are mind-boggling. But then there are several people who've studied this number. The actual investments that take place are a very small fraction of the big numbers that are announced. So if you say the Gujarat model is emblematic or epitomizes what's happening in India, I would agree. The government, this government in particular, likes to announce big schemes. It has renamed every existing scheme, not just remove the names of Nehru and Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi, but renamed scheme. Everything that this government wants from the Central Vista redevelopment, they want to think big. But as soon as you start going a little deep into these schemes and projects and announcements and programs, you'll often find that the claims that are made are hollow.
Okay. Paranjoy, we'll continue this conversation. As you very rightly pointed out, we don't have all the time in the world to kind of discuss.
Next time I'll tell you about the Adani Empire.
Right.
And it's in so many areas,
Yeah.
You'll be surprised, yes.
Right. Certainly, we'll continue the conversation and look forward to having you more often in the AIDEM interactions. Thank you very much for giving us the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.